I used to, she admitted, her voice low. But life gets busy. You stop thinking about what you love and start thinking about what you owe everyone. Daniel nodded. I know that feeling. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. There was no flirting, no tension, just understanding. But deep inside, Emily felt something shift. When she got home that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words, his tone, the way he looked at her, not with desire but with recognition. It wasn't about attraction. It was about being seen. It felt dangerous only because it felt so rare. Over the next few classes, that quiet connection grew stronger. They talked more, laughed more, and though nothing inappropriate was ever said or done, there was an invisible thread between them, something unspoken but undeniable. Emily found herself dressing a little nicer before class. Wearing the scarf she once loved, applying lipstick she hadn't touched in years. She didn't do it for him, she told herself. She did it because she felt like herself again. Daniel never crossed any lines. He treated her with respect, but his attention had a softness that felt personal. Sometimes, when he leaned over to guide her brushstroke, their hands brushed. It was accidental, brief, yet it left her heart pounding faster than she wanted to admit. One Wednesday, it rained heavily. Only a few students showed up. Daniel decided to keep the session informal, letting everyone paint whatever they felt. Emily painted a window with rain streaming down, much like the one she often looked out of at home. Daniel stood behind her for a while, quietly watching. That's beautiful, he said softly. You've painted loneliness in a way that feels peaceful. She looked at him, caught off guard. You can tell. I can feel it, he said. Artists can't hide from their hearts, Emily. Whatever you feel always finds a way out. Her brush trembled slightly. For the first time, she felt that someone truly understood the ache she carried, not to fix it, but to recognize it. When class ended, Daniel offered to walk her to her car since it was raining. The night was cold, the air smelling of wet pavement. They stood for a moment under the awning, waiting for the rain to slow. Thank you for the class, Emily said. I didn't realize how much I needed this. I should be thanking you, he replied with a smile. You remind me why I started teaching, to help people find parts of themselves they thought they'd lost. The rain eased, and she turned to go. But before she could take a step, Daniel said quietly, Emily, you're not invisible. Not to everyone. She didn't know how to respond. Her throat felt tight. She managed a faint smile, whispered goodnight, and hurried to her car. As she drove home, her heart beat faster than it should have. The windshield wipers brushed away the rain, but not the thoughts flooding her mind. She knew she wasn't doing anything wrong, yet she couldn't deny that something was changing inside her that night. When she walked into her quiet home, she felt torn between two worlds. One was safe, familiar, steady. The other was uncertain but alive. Mark looked up from the couch as she entered. Long night? He asked. Yes, she said, forcing a small smile. It was raining. He nodded and went back to his show. Emily went upstairs, changed into her pajamas, sat by the window looking out at the rain. She thought about Daniel's words, "You're not invisible," and felt both comforted and frightened by them. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, but she knew it wasn't just about art anymore. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't expected to find. And as she sat there in the soft glow of the lamp, Emily realized this was the moment everything quietly began to change. The next Wednesday came with a strange energy. Emily felt it the moment she stepped into the art studio. The usual chatter of students filled the air, but her attention was drawn immediately to Daniel. He was setting up the easels, sleeves rolled up, a faint trace of paint on his wrist. When their eyes met, both smiled, not like teacher and student, but like two people who shared a quiet secret neither could name. During class, everything felt sharper. The colors, the music, even the way Daniel spoke. Emily tried to focus on her painting, but her mind wandered. Each time he passed by her table, her pulse quickened. And when his hand brushed hers as he guided her stroke, gentle, careful, she froze. The world seemed to stop for that 1 second. It wasn't planned, it wasn't wrong. but it felt like standing on the edge of something dangerous and beautiful. They both knew it. Daniel stepped back quickly, pretending to check another student's work. Emily's cheeks burned. She told herself it was just the moment, nothing more. But deep down, she knew something had changed. After class, she packed up slowly, hoping to clear her thoughts before heading home. Daniel was wiping down the tables when he said quietly, "Emily, can I ask you something?" She turned. "Of course. Are you happy?" His voice was low, almost hesitant. "I mean, in your life?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Not her husband, not her friends. She could have lied, but she didn't. "I don't know," she said softly. "Some days I think I am. Other days I feel like I'm just existing." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression full of understanding. "You deserve more than that. Everyone does." For a long moment they stood in silence, surrounded by the faint smell of turpentine and rain. Then Daniel smiled gently. "Art helps," he said. "It reminds you that you're still alive." She smiled back, grateful for his kindness, but also unsettled by how much his words mattered to her. Over the next few weeks, Emily tried to distance herself emotionally. She focused on her family, cooked dinner, attended school meetings, smiled when Mark told her about work. But she felt like she was living two lives, one painted in dull gray, the other alive with color. Wednesday nights became the heartbeat of her week, even though she never admitted it. Daniel never crossed the line. He was always respectful, but his eyes sometimes said what his words never did. When he spoke to her, it was as if no one else existed. One evening, after class, he shared some news. "I've been offered a chance to show my work in New York," he said, trying to sound casual. "That's wonderful," Emily said, forcing a smile. "You must be thrilled." "I am," he said, but his eyes didn't match his tone. "It's a big opportunity. I'll probably have to move there for a while." Something inside Emily twisted. The thought of the studio without him felt emptier than she expected. She congratulated him, told him how proud she was, but the words tasted heavy. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about his news, about what his absence would mean. She told herself it shouldn't matter. He was her art teacher, nothing more. Yet her heart didn't listen. The following week, the class had fewer students. Rain poured hard outside, wind rattling the windows. When everyone else left early, only Emily and Daniel remained, cleaning up quietly. The silence between them was heavy, filled with words neither dared to say. Finally, Daniel broke it. "I wanted to tell you first," he said softly. "The exhibit is official. I'll be leaving in 2 weeks. Okay." Emily nodded, staring at her hands. "That's amazing, Daniel. You deserve it." He looked at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You've changed since you joined this class. You seem stronger, brighter." She met his eyes. "You helped me remember who I was before I forgot." They stood by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Neither moved, but the space between them felt charged with every unspoken emotion. Emily's voice trembled when she finally said, "You made me feel alive again, and that scares me." Daniel's eyes softened. Maybe that's all we were meant to do for each other, remind, not replace. The honesty in his tone hit her harder than anything else. It was beautiful, painful, and real. She wanted to say something, but words failed her. All she could do was nod. When she finally stepped outside, the rain had softened into a mist. Daniel walked her to her car, holding his umbrella above them. They didn't talk, didn't touch, but the silence said everything. Before she got in, he said quietly, "Thank you, Emily, for reminding me that connection still exists." She wanted to reply, but her throat was tight. She smiled faintly, whispered goodbye, and drove away. Watching his figure fade in the rearview mirror. On the way home, her chest felt heavy. The windshield wipers beat in rhythm with her thoughts. She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet she couldn't deny that she'd come close to something that could have changed her life completely. What scared her most wasn't the almost love she felt for Daniel. It was how much she had forgotten to love herself before him. When she got home, the house was quiet. Mark was asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing. She turned it off and stood there, watching him. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel angry at him. She just felt distant. Not because he'd done something wrong, but because they had both stopped trying. That night, Emily cried softly, not out of guilt, but out of release. She realized that what she had with Daniel wasn't betrayal. It was a mirror showing her how far she had drifted from her own heart. The next morning, she painted. She poured every emotion, confusion, sadness, gratitude onto the canvas. What came out was a storm of color, wild and beautiful. It was messy, but honest. When she finished, she stood back and whispered, "That's me." Emily Carter's life looked perfect from the outside. A nice house in Portland, 2 teenage kids doing well in school, and a husband, Mark, who worked hard and never forgot to take out the trash. But somewhere along the way, the warmth between them had faded. Their marriage had turned into a routine, a polite, quiet partnership built on schedules and responsibilities. Mornings began with half smiles and coffee. Nights ended with small talk about bills and the kids. There was no anger, no dramage, a silence that grew heavier with time. Emily often found herself standing by the kitchen window, watching rain slide down the glass. The gray sky felt familiar, almost comforting. She wasn't unhappy exactly, but she wasn't truly living either. The laughter she once had was gone, replaced by a calm emptiness that no one seemed to notice. Mark was always busy, always tired, always kind, but his kindness had become distant, automatic. They lived together, at miles apart. Her friends told her it was normal that every marriage settled into quiet comfort, but Emily didn't want to believe that love was supposed to fade into stillness. She missed the feeling of being seen, having someone notice the little things, the way she changed her hair, or how she loved sunflowers more than roses. These small things had once mattered. Now, she felt invisible inside her own life. One rainy Thursday, after dropping her son off at soccer practice, Emily stopped by a small coffee shop she hadn't visited before. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon filled the air. She stood in line, scrolling through her phone, not really looking for anything. But then her eyes landed on a bright flyer pinned to the community board near the door. Evening art classes for anyone ready to try something new. Something about that simple line caught her attention. It wasn't the art that pulled her, it was the phrase, "try something new." Those words echoed in her mind. When was the last time she had tried something for herself? When had she done anything that wasn't for her family, her job, or her home? She tore off one of the small paper tabs at the bottom of the flyer, slipping it into her purse before she could change her mind. The idea followed her through the day, through dinner, through the quiet conversation with Mark about grocery lists and weekend plans. She didn't tell him about the class. It wasn't a secret, at least, not yet. It just felt like something personal, something small she wanted to keep for herself. The next morning, she called the number. A friendly voice answered, giving her details about the art class held every Wednesday evening at a small studio downtown. The fee was low, and the first session was open to beginners. Emily didn't think twice. She signed up, even though part of her was nervous. It had been years since she'd done anything creative. When Wednesday arrived, she almost backed out. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her hair for the 5th time, telling herself she was too old to start painting. But something inside her pushed back, a quiet voice reminding her that she deserved to feel alive again. So she grabbed her coat, stepped into the drizzle, and drove to the address written on the flyer. The art studio was tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, people chatted and laughed softly, setting up their easels. Emily felt out of place at first. Everyone seemed younger, freer, more confident. She took a deep breath and walked in. "Hi, you must be Emily," a man said, stepping forward with a smile. He was tall, wearing a paint-stained shirt and an expression that was both kind and tired. "I'm Daniel, the instructor. Welcome to our little escape from the real world." Emily smiled a little nervously. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I picked up a brush." "That's the beauty of it," Daniel said. Art doesn't care how long it's been. It's just happy you came back." His words were simple, but they stayed with her. She found a seat near the back and tried to relax as the class began. The room filled with the soft sound of brushes and quiet chatter. Daniel walked around offering gentle advice, making everyone feel at ease. When he stopped by her easel and complimented the way she mixed her colors, Emily felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't attraction exactly. It was warmth. It was being noticed out for the first time in years. She lost herself in something. Time slipped away as she painted, forgetting about the world outside. When the class ended, Daniel thanked everyone and reminded them to come early next week. As Emily cleaned her brushes, she realized she was smiling, genuinely smiling, that night. When she drove home, the city lights blurred through the rain on her windshield. She turned off the radio and let her thoughts wander. She wasn't sure what this new feeling was: hope, excitement, maybe both. All she knew was that she wanted to go back. When she walked into the house, Mark was in the living room watching TV. He looked up and said, "You're home late." "Art class," she said simply. Hanging her coat, he nodded, eyes back on the screen. "That's nice." And that was it. No questions, no curiosity. Just another ordinary sentence in their quiet life. But for Emily, it didn't feel ordinary anymore. She felt a small, secret flicker of life returning. For years she had been a wife, a mother, a caretaker, but that night, for the first time in a long while, she felt like herself as she lay in bed beside her sleeping husband. She thought about the studio's warm light, the smell of paint, and Daniel's kind eyes. She didn't know what this new chapter meant or where it would lead. But she knew one thing for certain: something inside her had woken up. The next morning, the world looked a little brighter. The same rain fell, the same coffee brewed, but Emily's heart beat differently. She caught her reflection in the window and almost didn't recognize the soft glow on her face. She was still the same woman, but something had changed. And deep down, she knew this small decision, this simple art class, was about to change everything. Cliffhanger: the next Wednesday, when Emily walked back into the studio, she didn't realize that Daniel's quiet smile would become the beginning of the most unexpected connection of her life. The following Wednesday, Emily arrived at the art studio early. The room was still quiet, the air carrying the soft scent of paint and wood. She chose a seat near the window and watched the rain tapping against the glass. For the first time in years, she felt nervous in a good way, like the first day of something new. When Daniel walked in, he smiled when he saw her. It wasn't a polite, distant smile. It was warm, real, and it made her heart skip just slightly. "Glad to see you back," he said as he unpacked the paints. "Most people don't show up for week 2. Emily laughed softly. "I almost didn't, but something told me I needed to." Daniel nodded, his eyes kind. "That's how art works. It keeps calling you until you listen." As more students arrived, Daniel started the lesson. He explained how to use light and shadows to show emotion on a canvas. His voice was calm, thoughtful, and every word seemed to carry meaning beyond painting. Emily found herself studying him while pretending to focus on her work. He wasn't movie star handsome, but there was something magnetic about his quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of understanding himself. When he walked past her table, he paused to look at her painting. "You have a gentle touch," he said. "It's like you're painting feelings, not just objects." Emily felt her cheeks warm. "Maybe I am," she said softly. For the next few weeks, Wednesday nights became her escape. She looked forward to them more than she wanted to admit. The studio was filled with laughter, music, and the low hum of brushes against canvas. Every time Daniel came near, Emily felt her heart stir. They talked between strokes about small things, favorite movies, places they'd been, dreams they'd forgotten. Daniel told her he had once been married. "It ended a few years ago," he said one evening as they cleaned brushes. "We wanted different lives, I guess. She needed more than I could give." "I'm sorry," Emily said gently. He shrugged, smiling faintly. "It taught me something important. That love isn't about having someone, it's about understanding them." His words stayed with her. That night as she drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Not in a romantic way exactly, but as someone who saw the world in a way she hadn't in a long time. Daniel seemed to understand things she couldn't put into words. At home, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table reading emails on his laptop. "How was class?" he asked, eyes still on the screen. "It was nice," she said. "That's good," he replied without looking up. That was all. The conversation ended there. Emily didn't blame him. They had both built quiet walls over the years. Still, part of her wished he'd ask what she was painting, or why she smiled when she spoke about it as the weeks passed. Daniel became more than a teacher. He became someone who reminded her what passion looked like. Not just romantic passion, but the simple hunger for life itself. When she painted under his guidance, she felt awake. He encouraged her to experiment, to make mistakes, to find beauty in imperfection. One night after class, most students had left, but Emily stayed behind to finish a small landscape she had started. Daniel was locking up brushes when he looked at her canvas and said quietly, "You don't give yourself enough credit, Emily. You see beauty everywhere except in yourself." She froze, brush in hand. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not in years. Maybe not ever. A week later, Daniel held his last class before leaving. Everyone brought snacks and said warm goodbyes. Emily gave him a small framed sketch of the first flower she had ever painted under his guidance. "To remind you of your first student who didn't believe she could paint," she said. He smiled, eyes bright with emotion. "I'll never forget," he said quietly. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Their goodbye was in the way they looked at each other, full of gratitude, sorrow, and something deeper that neither would ever speak aloud that night. Emily drove home through the same rain that had followed her since the first day she walked into the studio. Only this time, she didn't feel lost. She felt awake. The weeks after Daniel left felt strangely quiet. The art studio continued under a new instructor, but it wasn't the same. Emily went a few times, then stopped. The colors didn't feel alive anymore. Yet, she didn't regret anything that had happened. She carried Daniel's words with her. "Maybe we were meant to remind you, not replace." Those words replayed in her mind like a song, steady and comforting. She began to wake up earlier, drinking her coffee near the window like always. But this time she didn't feel heavy inside. Instead, she watched the sunrise instead of the rain. Something in her had shifted. She didn't feel trapped anymore. She felt curious. For the first time in years, Emily started painting at home. She set up a small corner near the dining room window, laid down a white cloth, and began to paint every morning before anyone else woke up. Mark noticed the change before she even mentioned it. One morning he came downstairs and found her lost in her work. The smell of paint mixed with the scent of coffee. He stood quietly watching her. When she finally looked up, surprised, he smiled awkwardly. "I didn't know you painted." "It's new," she said with a small grin. "Something I started recently." He nodded, walking closer. "You're good," he said, looking at the canvas of soft ocean colors. "Really good." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. It was such a simple compliment, but it meant something. They hadn't spoken like that in years. That moment wasn't grand or romantic. It was real. Something had cracked open between them. And light was starting to find its way through Dot. As days passed, she found herself talking to Mark more. It began with small things, how work was going, how the kids were doing, what to make for dinner. But soon, their conversations stretched longer. Mark began leaving his phone aside during meals, asking about her paintings. She told him about Daniel, about the art class, and even about how lost she had felt before joining Dot. At first, Mark was quiet. Emily thought maybe she'd said too much, but then he looked at her and said softly, "I didn't realize you felt that way. I guess I stopped seeing things I should have noticed." His honesty made her eyes sting. "We both did," she said. "We got busy surviving, not living. It didn't fix everything overnight." Some nights they still sat in silence, unsure how to bridge years of distance. But something was changing. They started walking together in the evenings, just around the neighborhood, sometimes without saying much. Other times, they'd talk about the past, the early days of their marriage. The dreams they used to share. Emily didn't bring up Daniel again. But his presence lingered quietly, not as a wound, but as a lesson. He had shown her what it felt like to be seen, and now she wanted to build that again with Mark, the man who had once made her laugh in the rain. Long before routine dulled their joy. One Saturday morning, Emily suggested they repaint the living room. Mark looked surprised but agreed. As they worked together, laughter came easily again, splatters of paint on hands. Teasing about color choices, old music playing in the background. It wasn't passion like in the movies. It was something steadier, something real. Later that day, Mark found one of Emily's sketchbooks lying open on the table. Inside were paintings that told her story without words. One of a woman standing in the rain, one of two figures standing apart under gray skies, and one of sunlight breaking through clouds. He turned the pages slowly, understanding without asking. When Emily walked in, he looked up and asked quietly, "Who's he?" She froze, then realized he was pointing to the painting of the two figures. There was no anger in his voice, only curiosity. Emily took a deep breath. "Someone who reminded me what it means to feel alive," she said honestly. But that's all it ever was. A reminder. Mark looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe we both needed one. That night they sat together on the porch as the sun went down. It was quiet, but comfortable. Mark reached for her hand, not out of habit, but with meaning. His grip was warm, steady. "I want us to start over," he said softly. "Not from where we left off, but from where we are now." Tears filled her eyes. "I'd like that," she whispered. From then on, Emily didn't paint to escape. She painted because she loved it. She began selling small pieces online, mostly landscapes and quiet portraits. People wrote to her saying her art felt peaceful, full of hope. That made her smile. She had painted those pieces while healing herself. Months passed. The house felt brighter. Mark and Emily found new ways to connect, cooking together, spending Sundays in the park, laughing again like they used to. There were still hard days, but they faced them together now, instead of separately. One afternoon, as Emily cleaned her brushes, her daughter walked in and said, "Mom, you seem happier lately." Emily smiled, glancing out the window where the sunlight danced on the leaves. "I think I am," she said. That evening, Mark surprised her with a small wrapped box. Inside was a set of professional-grade paints. "For your new journey," he said with a grin. She laughed softly, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mark." He kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you for finding your light again. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it." Emily felt her heart swell. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was something deeper. A quiet, real kind of love that had been rebuilt from honesty and forgiveness. That night, she stood by the same window she used to stare out of during those lonely mornings. The rain had returned, falling softly against the glass. But this time, she didn't feel the ache she once did. Instead, she felt calm, like everything had found its right place. She thought of Daniel for a brief moment, wondering where he was. If he was happy, if his art exhibit had gone well. She didn't feel sadness anymore, only gratitude. He had been the spark that started a fire she didn't know she still had inside her. Emily smiled, picked up her coffee and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. In that quiet moment, she understood something profound, that life doesn't always give you second chances in grand, dramatic ways. Sometimes it gives you a whisper, a nudge, or a new beginning disguised as a small act of courage. Trying something new hadn't destroyed her life. It had rebuilt it. Months later, her first solo art show opened at a local gallery. Mark stood beside her, proud and smiling as guests admired her work. On the wall hung one special painting, two figures standing under rain, close but not touching. Below it, the title read, "The Moment That Changed Everything." Emily didn't explain it to anyone. Some stories were meant to be felt, not told. As the evening ended, she and Mark walked out hand in hand. The night air was cool, the street lights soft. She looked up at him and said, I think we're finally living again. He smiled. Yeah, he said quietly, and it's about time. The rain began to fall again, gentle, cleansing, familiar. Emily didn't run from it. She lifted her face toward the sky, eyes closed, feeling it wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was missing something. She had found what she needed, not in another person, but within herself. Ending line: sometimes trying something new doesn't mean leaving your life behind. It means rediscovering the beauty that was waiting inside it all along.